I would like to introduce Romil to everybody first. Romil Sheth, he holds a Master of Urban Design and a Master of Science in Architecture from the University of Michigan. And he received his Bachelor of Architecture from CEPT University in India. His work encompasses diverse project types, including campuses, student housing, K-12 facilities, urban revitalization, innovation districts, and waterfronts. And so I'd like to welcome you to this event, and the mic and the screen is yours.
Thank you. No, it's great to be here. Yeah, so I can you see my screen? Oh, it's getting ready, I guess.
Yeah, it's just coming up. I can see your screen. Yes, I can see the presentation.
Slides are moving now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so thank you for having me here. As you described, I have a background in architecture and urban design. And for over the last 10 years, I've been working very closely with Dennis and others at Sasaki, doing a series of projects at different scales, both, from the scale of small neighborhoods to kind of large cities. And I think one of the things that I really enjoy is engaging with cities and different cultures in different contexts. So, I've done work in India, in Vietnam, in China, in the US, so all over in the Middle East, and so different parts of the world. And I think that's been really helpful in shaping an approach to urbanism. I'm just going to show you one project today. It's for what we call the Ho Chi Minh City Highly Interactive and Innovative Urban Area, and this is for Ho Chi Minh City, which is in Vietnam. It's one of the most populated cities in the world, and we were invited for a competition, which we subsequently won, to develop a high-level approach to this part of the city. And maybe what I should do is just to orient people. I'm just going to go to Google Earth and show you Ho Chi Minh City and give you a sense of what that city is about. You're still seeing my screen, right?
Yeah. You can see the okay. Yeah.
So this is Ho Chi Minh City, right here. It's again an incredibly energized and dynamic city, which forms the financial capital. The political capital is Hanoi, which is to the north, but this forms more the financial and cultural capital of the country of Vietnam. And so this area here, which is where it says Independence Palace, this is called District 1. This is the heart of the city. And this is where most of the traditional development has occurred. This was where the kind of historical origins of the city are. So we were given a task to develop an idea for all of this area just east of it. So east of District 1, where you have just across the river. So it's a large area of about 20,000 hectares, and so it was to really create a large scale vision for this area. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. Can you see the PowerPoint now? It's just hard to tell with this Google Meets.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. So we came up with these ideas of 4 kind of guiding principles. One was this idea of being connected. So where you can really kind of make sure that the different parts of the city and people living in it are connected through transportation and infrastructure in a very kind of robust way, making sure that people have access to diverse forms of connection. This idea of being ubiquitous was to really kind of create regional synergies around, targeted development, strategies around different skills, around entrepreneurship, around, a range of different programmatic components that would give the city a strong identity, but also allow larger scale investments and smaller scale entrepreneurs to coexist. This idea of being local was an important one because Vietnam has a very strong and rich street life and street culture. At the same time, they have these aspirations of being a global city, or a city that is, high tech, that really kind of engages with 21st century cities. So this is about balancing local culture with larger kind of global aspirations and needs. And the idea of resiliency, this again is a critical aspect because most of Vietnam, and especially this part of the country, is highly vulnerable to sea level rise and climate change. They have, if you look at images of the city in the monsoons, they have, huge flooding issues. So we want to make sure that we create a framework that's resilient, that allows the development to really kind of coexist with water, and really kind of maximizes open space as well. Another important aspect is to really kind of look at this idea of engaging or creating a process that will engage the citizens of the city. A lot of planning in Vietnam happens very top down and it's very bureaucratic. One of the things we're trying to do is this idea of a multi-helix model, where it becomes a partnership between government, industry, and academia, but it puts the people or the society right at the heart of it. And so we are now currently working on a process of engagement with the citizens of the city to really kind of help inform what the larger vision should be. And then this kind of led us to looking at this kind of larger kind of regional framework. So you can see here in the larger black line is the entire Ho Chi Minh City region. Downtown Ho Chi Minh City is right here in the middle. And the darker area, which says Tu Duc D2 and D9, that's District 2 and District 9, is the area that we were looking at as part of this larger vision. And so the city has a series of ring roads that kind of, which is quite similar to a lot of cities that have developed, where you have a lot of peripheral roads. But again, not a lot of internal kind of connectivity within this area. So that's one of the things that we looked at carefully. This shows you the impact of sea level rise. So you can see in these images, we did a lot of mapping of hydrology, of climate change impacts, of sea level rise impacts. And you can see, if you look at 2050 in a large flood event, most of the eastern part of the zone would be underwater. So you can see again how vulnerable the city is to these impacts. This was the existing master plan that the city had done by themselves. And one of the things you can see is that they have completely ignored a lot of these climatic factors, the ecological factors, and they spread development across the entire region. And so this is something that we first started doing, was analyzing the existing plan, the existing conditions, to see how we would shape our approach. And so one of the things that we looked at was, again, bringing this idea of being connected, was to introduce a much more finer grained system of roads and infrastructure that would also carry transit on them. So, all of these new dashed lines represent new roads that connect existing networks, but also kind of creates systems that would connect back to the new airport, which is being built on the eastern side of the city. The other interesting thing is to kind of, use these network of roads and transit corridors to kind of really concentrate investment along them. So, making sure you create high density, equitable development that takes place across these corridors, where you can easily provide access to, diverse income types and folks. And so our overall kind of vision, as you can see, is quite a departure from the existing plan, where we essentially preserved a lot of this area on the eastern side, which is highly vulnerable, by keeping it as open space and by keeping it as what we call sponge landscapes that can absorb water, when you have extreme flood events. And then a lot of the density was concentrated, along some of the transit corridors that occur through the site. And then here we focused on 7 different zones. And each of these zones, again, are located along these darker kind of purple lines. So there's 2TM, which is a project that Dennis and I worked on, have been working on for a while. And that would be really focused on financial technologies. This one, which is called F1, became a hub for sports and wellness. There's an existing port, an industrial port here, which is going to be moving out of the city. So this became a place to kind of really try a more transformational development. They do have an existing, high-tech industrial district, where you have companies like Intel, Samsung, other kind of chip manufacturing companies. So again, reinforcing that. Then they have a national university hub where they have about 5 or 6 different universities that are concentrated there. So we want to kind of tap into that as well. And then finally here we were looking at a place of creating something that's much more of an ecological hub. So how do you kind of create development or a project that's really sensitive and works with water and larger ecological conditions? So while we did an overall framework plan, we then zoomed into these 7 zones and did urban design frameworks for them. And so we look at and I'll go through these quickly. So the first one is the 2TM plan. And this really kind of looked at this idea of financial technology because you have the old financial district across the river. So this would become a place for next generation banking, for blockchain development, for larger investments in securities and artificial intelligence that takes place within the larger financial sector. And so really kind of leveraging that as the main programmatic driver. This is the plan that Dennis and I did a while ago, and that's now currently being implemented. And so you can see the implementation of this plan. And a large part of this plan was also preservation of open space systems for managing stormwater and this kind of climate change impact. So you can see how the south part is a series of mangroves and wetlands, whereas the development is pushed further inwards, and a grading strategy allows flood mitigation to take place. But you can see how this development is starting to take place now. But what we did as part of this exercise was really focus on a part of this larger plan and zoom into it. There's a series of existing cultural buildings and churches that we kind of preserved, but we really kind of concentrated this financial sector right around that, close to a transit stop and in very close proximity to this District 1. And it really became about making these larger connections. So there's a private development called Empire City that's emerging around it. There's an exhibition center, there's a cultural hub and a conference center, a new kind of central plaza that was planned. So again, concentrating this as a pilot project, and from this, there could be other parts that might emerge in the broader district. And here you can see how we're making some of these larger connections to help reinforce this idea of a new financial hub, but something that's also vibrant and connected to the larger ecosystem of this neighborhood. And so you can here see some of those images where some of these existing, churches and cultural buildings are repurposed as cafes, as smaller scale incubators and workplaces for co-working, etc. Around great new public spaces, and then you see new kind of development that could take place over time. And this is an image of the streetscape and what that would look like. And here you can see how we've tried to widen the sidewalks and create places for this great street life that takes place in Ho Chi Minh City, where if you go to the city and you walk around the streets, there is this kind of ubiquitous nature of these blue and red stools that become tea shops, places for people to eat, for cafes. But you also get a very active urban edge. So it was, again, tapping into that. This also kind of looks at incorporating some of the local trees and vegetation that happen in the city, which are usually very tall and linear, and they create this great canopy. So again, making sure that the work that we're doing, encapsulates that. The Sports and Wellness Hub was, again, an interesting opportunity for us to think about not only just creating a bunch of stadiums, but also looking at places that would make Ho Chi Minh City a hub for research around health sciences and sports, as well as sport entrepreneurship. And so this is what you see on the bottom left is the existing condition and what the government had planned as just a sports complex and an opportunity zone near a transit hub. And the plan that we developed looked at creating a series of varied sports venues, from international level sporting areas to places for cycling, for gymnastics, for a series of different kind of events that would enable Ho Chi Minh City to hold the Asian Games, which attracts a pretty large contingent. But closely connected to this was also a series of larger kind of mixed-use developments that would allow places for media, hotels for people, a health-oriented facility for physiotherapy and medical kind of research, a zone around applied research in biomechanics, in athletics and performance wear, a sports innovation hub, and then a larger kind of mixed-use area that would allow allied industry to kind of coexist, as well as residential integrated within that. And the water that you see in the middle was also sized to allow major canoeing and rowing to take place within it. So you can see there's a very long linear stretch of a specific width to enable that. And here you can see again how it creates this larger economic innovation system where things are kind of connected, so that even when you're not having a major sports event, this can become a place for the community, for high school students, for college students. But at the same time, there's a critical mass of people that are really focused around the sports and health industry, doing active research and developing ideas around it. And so here are some images of how, again, a large part of this was preserved for communal interaction, for outdoor activities, for the larger city to access them. Here you can see how major kind of rain gardens were also introduced to kind of help manage stormwater if there's a storm surge in the river, while maintaining areas for competitive rowing and boating. But also kind of introducing new habitats would become great kind of parks for the larger city. And then this is an image of the stadium. And what's really interesting is that in a lot of Asian countries, it's not just the physical sports that have become very popular, but also gaming, especially around using virtual reality and augmented reality. So there's a huge component of that that's also integrated into the stadiums. Again, looking at the future of sports and sports gaming in addition to the physical aspects. The high-tech manufacturing park is a major economic engine of this area. And the thought here was to really kind of create this cyclical iterative process where you can design things, you can test things using advanced manufacturing techniques, you can prototype them using robotics and CNC, and actually then manufacture those products, really kind of creating this closed loop system that becomes a strong synergy between research, company partnerships, and manufacturing. And so this is a much larger zone, and there are already existing companies that coexist, but they don't really have a sense of place. And the idea here was to really kind of introduce a framework that created a strong sense of preservation around the existing hydrology and open spaces, but really kind of create a series of mixed-use clusters where you had residential, you had some of the larger kind of industrial areas that have their own space, you had mixed uses, and really kind of give them a strong sense of place and integration. And so here you can see how you can see some of these existing companies like Samsung, etc. We are also introducing university programs. So the Fulbright University would have a branch campus in here, making sure that this becomes a synergy again where academic research and ideation can take place together. Again, just showing in a similar way how the different parts of the ecosystem come together. One of the other things that we were looking at was this idea of an autonomous vehicle loop. This would be used not only to provide transit connectivity, but also a way to test sensor technologies and an advancement of autonomous vehicle technology. And this kind of zooms into just one neighborhood to show you how it's not just industrial locations, but it brings in a whole other scale of research, of innovation, of prototyping, of high-tech fabrication, and then really binds them together with a great series of public spaces. And so this is an image of how one of these kind of clusters might look like and the spaces within them. So it's a place for collaboration, for engagement, but also a place for people to go out and socialize within this zone. And we're also kind of looking at this idea of a resilient kind of manufacturing system where all of this could be three-dimensionally controlled. You could have places where you have larger, clean manufacturing facilities, places for really testing things, a training center for the workforce, really being able to upskill, especially as new skills need to be developed, and you need to provide constant training for them. So providing training centers, and certainly places for research around materials and fabrication as well. And again, this is another view of what some of these spaces might look like, where you might have live demonstrations of robots. And what's interesting now is that the first 3D printed homes are now being built, especially in Europe. So you can imagine like a place like this where you could have robots really kind of showcasing how some of these technologies are now being used for, larger scale, design of whether it's houses or other objects. Universities play a very important role, especially when they are adjacent to larger research areas. And what's interesting in Ho Chi Minh City is that they have a pretty high concentration of universities in this national university hub. And here the idea was to kind of really take the universities to the next level by introducing these ideas of full-scale test beds, but also a range of different spaces and uses for study, for collaboration, for incubation, larger maker spaces, and really kind of create a strong synergy between the National University Hub and the High-Tech Research Park. And so here, again, the framework looked at, the existing universities you can see are in this gray zone here. And the idea was to kind of create synergies between that and introduce a series of new hubs where both research activity could take place as well as new kind of allied industry zones could be located, in close proximity to the research park. One of the big things that Ho Chi Minh City is also doing is looking at research around agriculture and food sciences. So this whole area in the middle would be not only an ecological habitat, but a huge test bed for testing new forms of urban agriculture within it. And again, this just shows how these different parts come together, and these new research district and how it gets integrated within the existing university and expansion for them. And again, in a similar way to the other districts, you see this kind of larger ecosystem of not only universities, but public service centers. There's again an autonomous vehicle loop that connects everything together. But each of these areas would now have a strong hub and a sense of place, which kind of previously lacked. The idea also is to integrate housing and be intentional. So housing is not just here, but it's embedded within each of these different areas. So it becomes much more mixed use in terms of the connection between academic and living areas. And this idea is, how we can create these larger kind of outdoor testing environments. And so you can imagine places like this, within the different university hubs where you might have housing in these towers close by. The lower buildings would represent the research, academic areas, classrooms, but also, student maker spaces and ideation labs. And then this would be a place where, within the research district, where again, it brings together not only academic and allied research, but also academic components together. The ecological hub was an interesting exercise where we want to kind of create a new paradigm of creating this eco-urban neighborhood that again really kind of builds on the larger culture of Vietnam of having water-oriented developments, especially if you go to the Mekong Delta and look at some of the more kind of vernacular settlements. They had this very interesting relationship with water, with markets and agriculture, and yet, created very sensitive developments around that. And so our plan kind of looked at creating, these kind of very low intensity, ecological friendly series of clusters that are embedded within a larger network of open spaces and blue-green areas that become sponge landscapes. And yet, having smaller cores of, higher density or mixed use that would help give this area a sense of place. So here there was also a proposal by the government to create a smaller net zero campus that we kind of accommodated within that. But we also preserved a lot of the existing agriculture and kind of reinforced that. A lot of the area to the south here, which is in the lower lands, would become place not only for ecological tourism, but also for research into resiliency and long-scale, hydrological systems. So here you can see how this becomes again, this is the densest part of this neighborhood where it's, again, creating these series of neighborhoods across the main kind of a river. And again, bringing together university components, housing, as well as office, R&D, and also, small scale incubators. But a very different kind of environment to the other areas. The other areas were much more urban in nature. Here you can see how this neighborhood really kind of works with water to kind of create great urban conditions with floating markets, etc., even incorporating urban agriculture within it. But at the same time, also creates a system where we're creating these kind of resilient riparian zones. So while you have the main river or the secondary river, there is a fairly wide zone of floodable areas that could be used for active and passive recreation, but also becomes a place for water to expand if required. So the development zones are pushed further inland, so they're not affected. But you have a great zone in the middle that becomes essentially parkland that can accommodate these larger flood events. So here's another image of what this hub would kind of look like, where if you're in one of these kind of park systems along the water, you can see places where you could do kayaking, where you have different kind of habitats, where there's research that's taking place around around these areas, around ecology, around resiliency. And so in these buildings here would be research institutes that are located right along this. Again, trying to paint a new vision for this area. And the final one is this idea of a future hub. And this really is around this port. And the intent here was to kind of create something that's much more high-tech, more futuristic, that really, again, becomes a place to test new forms of development, but also living, working, and making things. And so this is the existing port. The two parts in yellow are kind of areas that have to remain within the site, but a large part of the port would go away over time. And some very interesting kind of urban artifacts that are part of this area that we looked at preserving and transforming as well, especially these larger kind of gantries and structures around them. And so this became a larger kind of vision for really kind of creating this future district that would have, not only great companies and research and residential, but there's again, places for a branch campus around an innovation hub. There's integrated live work housing, there are markets, cultural spaces, a great kind of system of parks and open spaces and plazas that are embedded within it. Here you can see one of these existing structures that's been reinvented into a design center around an arts and media campus. So again, this became a place to really kind of create something that's much more experimental in terms of what could be a great mix of uses and a sense of urban conditions. So you can see how these different kind of uses kind of come together, for whether it's office, retail, R&D, larger event spaces or amenities. There's also, aspects of high-tech manufacturing and residential that are integrated within it. So again, trying to create a vision for transforming this port over time. And here you can see, again, this was kind of, since it's being much more interactive and especially near this media and art campus, you can see how we were looking at, again, looking at the future of art and bringing art and innovation around art as well into the public realm, and then transforming, some of these existing structures as part of that. This also became a place for creating this larger resilient ecosystem around managing waste, optimizing resources, but also kind of creating a smart infrastructure system where you can monitor, how much water you're using, how much energy you're using, how can you create the optimized waste network. So again, creating a system within this futuristic hub for integrating smart technologies. And again, a place where you can have also, great kind of cutting edge companies and industries that are located here and really kind of helping transform the way ideas are developed and knowledge is kind of created. So I'll stop here. I think there was a lot to kind of go through, but hopefully it gives you a sense of a process going from a high level vision for a larger city and drilling down into smaller kind of neighborhoods and how they work together.
Yes, I think it was a fantastic presentation and a very dynamic project to look at.